Hi, good afternoon. For the next 10 to 20 minutes, I'd like to talk about meaning, and I'd like to talk about why humanity has become so susceptible to chronic pleasure seeking. When I say chronic pleasure seeking, I mean scrolling through social media, turning to other forms of cheap dopamine, whether that is nicotine or marijuana or junk food or any one of the number of dopamine increasing substances that are immediately accessible to us. Young people, and I think people in general, have become very dependent on these things. And this is not a willpower problem. We also have a social media ecosystem that is absolutely saturated with self-improvement influencers who are telling us it's a willpower problem. You need to be stronger. You need to have more control over yourself, and the fact that you can't get any momentum in life because you are pinned down to the couch, drowning yourself in cheap pleasures that just keep you in the same place. That's on you. And I think that that's a little bit reductive. I don't think that that actually addresses the root of the problem. So let's take a step back for 1 second and remember that all humans need meaningful activity. We need to be working towards something that we think is worth something. And for a long time, I think this was built into our existence as people, right? We had to get up and get water and take care of the people around us for survival. And then beyond that, we would tell stories around a fire, but there was community around what we were doing. And now in an information age, in an age of distraction and chronic consumption, where we are isolated and have all the access to the cheap pleasures and none of the connection, of course we're going to turn to worship the meaning that comes from gratifying our instant pleasures, that instant gratification. And so we have a culture that's kind of built on that. And it's no wonder that young people especially turn to this, because for most of us, we've been looking at bad news for a very long time. And so I think there's a general air of hopelessness as well in the culture. I mean, when you have negativity streaming at you from 1,000 different channels that you are unable to turn off and are also conditioned into looking at all the time, because the stimulation from that negativity is inherently addicting, and it's designed that way so that you stay on there forever because that's how they're monetized. Look, we're getting into a lot of different issues here. I just want to get to the root of it for 1 second, which is that willpower is not the problem. It's part of the problem, but it's not the problem. Okay. You are more than capable of having control over yourself and your life and pursuing something meaningful. In fact, that's what you actually crave. That would be more fulfilling to you than turning to the cheap pleasures. And I know this because I was in your position and sometimes still am. I am not a self-improvement influencer. I am not a guru. I'm just a person who lives in that environment of chronic consumption, or I did for a long time. Grew up in it. I started scrolling when I was 14 and didn't think anything of it because that's what we all did, right? I vaped, I smoked, I did all the things that we don't need to get into right now that aren't immediately, they're not clearly the most destructive substances in the world, but when you have a lifestyle that is dependent on them to get from moment to moment, when you're living in a state where it's like the next thing that I'm looking forward to is just the next hit, and there's not really a larger story that you're connected to, obviously that's a problem. Obviously, that's not great. And obviously, that's going to lead to that era of hopelessness that we just touched on. It's going to enhance it. So then you're in this cycle. A little bit rambly right now, but I think you understand what I'm saying. So at its core, we're not going to look at the willpower right away. We're not going to look at the discipline that is necessary, but we're not going to look at that right now. How do we get meaning? How do we do something meaningful? Well, for the last several months, I've been spending a lot of time talking about creating that meaning through creative work, through using social media channels that have addicted us into constant stimulation to share our own ideas and to connect with other people, to pursue our interests, things that basically participate in the creator economy that is rapidly growing. Excuse me. Everyone make sure that you have some water as we have this conversation. Stay hydrated. Okay. Now, I think that's a great idea, starting with the creative work. What it doesn't address is the community. And that part I haven't figured out, so we're going to save that for another video. Creativity. Let's start there. When you pursue a question or a big problem, like what I'm doing with cheap pleasure seeking and internet addiction and meaninglessness in the age of distraction, when you pursue something like that, you have a game to play that is inherently meaningful. It's also going to be difficult, and things that are difficult that move you forward are inherently meaningful as well. So, getting out of bed if you've been paralyzed in your position for a long time, that is inherently meaningful. Going outside for a walk, even though you might feel some resistance in the beginning, it's going to be good for you. It's going to make you feel good. There is inherent meaning in that. So you start with these little small things, but then you commit yourself to a big question like that, and you start speaking your mind. You start channeling something from yourself. You contribute something from yourself, which brings me to the core idea that's guided me for the last several months, which is that creativity is the direct one-to-one replacement for chronic consumption. And that makes sense on an intuitive level, right? If you are constantly filling a bottomless pit within yourself, trying to fill that void, if you flip that function on its head and start contributing something from yourself, whether that is artistic, creative work, or creative work in a different form, like being really good at your job or pursuing an athletic endeavor or going out and meeting a bunch of people. These are all creative acts because they're taking your initiative, what you decide to do as a conscious, autonomous human being, and then you go and you create something, an interaction, or you make something happen that wouldn't have happened unless you positioned yourself there. That's creativity and that's contribution. And taking that action, I say action, whatever, taking that action is crucial for overcoming the chronic consumption that we're conditioned into. Okay. So I've seen this for myself. When I started posting videos and sharing my ideas around this kind of thing, my relationship to social media shifted. It didn't heal itself over right away. I didn't immediately escape all the chronic addictions and cheap pleasure seeking, because when something's conditioned that deep inside you, you're not going to make it go away overnight. That being said, my relationship changed to the apps. And instead of looking at them, those little square icons on my phone screen, purely for a way to turn my brain off or to inject a quick hit of dopamine into my bloodstream and everything else, I saw them as a creative endeavor. And that was healing. That gave me something meaningful to do. It was a start. It was something that would be more fulfilling, more gratifying, more meaningful, more important than chronic distraction. Because when you get down to the root of it, folks, you don't actually want to be distracted. You don't. And it's the lack of community, and it's the lack of meaning, and it's the lack of helpful programming in your life, this lack of direction that used to be built into our human experience and now is not that way. That's what we are replacing with content and distraction and drugs and cheap dopamine and all the things that are immediately accessible to us that don't actually satisfy us. They don't satisfy us. They just create an open loop of desire. I want more. Hit. I want more. Hit. I want more. You understand how it works. You probably are in that right now, and I'm telling you that it's actually not as difficult as you think to get out of it. This is a very different conversation than like serious drug addiction to drugs that, create a withdrawal effect, sort of harder drugs. I'm talking about the distraction, the tranquilizing agents, okay? Meaning will get us out of that. Pursuing meaningful work will do that. And then when it comes to the stuff that we know is helpful, the working out, healthy habits, reading more, building a sleep routine, these things are talked about often by self-improvement influencers, and it's why those influencers are so successful, so popular. I think that one problem with that is that those influencers don't meet people where they're at. A lot of people really struggle with just the basic stuff, getting out of bed. And so then when they start aspiring to this great high ideal of operating at a high level and matching the David Gogginses of the world, they're inherently going to be let down. Or they might just push themselves to that limit as fast as they possibly can. And then the rubber band of their mental self-control and willpower snaps, because willpower is a finite resource. And then they're back to square one, potentially even in a deeper hole than they were before, because that repetitive start-stop motion where you start and then immediately lose momentum and crash down is very discouraging and just turns you back, puts you back in a place of seeking self-soothing through cheap dopamine, vaping, smoking, scrolling, distracting yourself, tranquilizing yourself. So we have to start small. And you have to understand that even starting small will be difficult, and that the challenge of it is meaningful. And that whoever you are, no matter where you're at, you can find something that is doable for you. You can scale back a healthy habit to something that is doable. And I've made videos about this. I've helped people get out of bed through a TikTok video where I say, okay, maybe you don't get up all at once. Maybe you just sit up a little bit and then back down and then try it again. A little bit more and then back down, and then you stand up, and then from there you think about what's next. Maybe it's not doing a whole load of laundry. Maybe it's just putting one sock in the laundry basket, right? This is basic behavioral stuff. But a lot of people need that encouragement, and a lot of people need to know that it's okay to start there when it comes to self-improvement. You do not need to start with a cold shower. I take cold showers regularly because I enjoy them, but I didn't start with that. Have some water. Have a sip of water. Don't try it, don't start 75 hard where you're drinking a gallon a day. Okay. So here's what we've covered so far. Meaningful creative work is a direct replacement for chronic consumption. And we want to start small with that. We also want to start small with the traditional lifestyle habits that we know are going to make us feel good. Daily movement, cleaning up our living environment, socializing, going out and seeing people, right? There's a lot of different ways to do this. Excuse me. But let's start with those two things. Those two things are fairly independent. They are individual. And even though I've identified, we can agree on this, that having community is central to solving this problem, you have to start with what's immediately in your control. And so those individual things, finding something creative to do and taking care of yourself, those two things make sense to start with. And they are inherently meaningful. And if you can find the place where they're easy enough to get started with, you will do them and you will learn to enjoy them. And then you can scale it up over time in the same way that you gradually increase weight when you're training in the gym. It's the same principle. Okay. So here's some ideas for both, just because I think structure is important, and then I'll get out of here and you can get on with your day. If you're here at this point, that's great. Thank you for being here. This is still a work in progress. As you can tell, okay. Creative work. Start with journaling. Journal for a single page. Let your thoughts out. If you need a prompt to get started with, write in as vivid detail and as vivid storytelling detail as you can muster. Diagnose your state right now. So if you are really unhappy with the state of your life, write about it in the journal, almost as if you're a fictional character. If this was square one for the protagonist that is you, in a messy room with laundry strewn about and crumbs from the debris of the last 7 meals all about your room, that's great. Write that down. Go into vivid detail. Experience it. Put it on the page. Learn to enjoy, on a sensory level, the feeling of putting black ink to paper or whatever writing utensil you prefer. That is a sensory experience that becomes genuinely enjoyable over time until you start to crave it. Journaling is great. If you're not so much a words person, you can do art. If you are a words person but you don't like writing, you can do something like this. But you're just trying to teach yourself how to channel what is inside of you out of you in a creative act. No one needs to see it. You don't need to post it. You can if you want, but you don't have to. It's for you. It's to give you a tool, a muscle that is more meaningful and that will pull you out of chronic consumption. That's all we're doing. We're going from chronic consumer to intentional creator or intentional user of technology, if you choose to use tech to make it happen. Okay, so that's the starting point. And then if none of those ideas work for you right now, the first thing that you can just start by doing is create a conversation, create an interaction, reach out to family members, reach out to friends, go out to a random place and talk to random people. That's pretty hard for most people, but if that resonates with you, you can go that way. But just take what's in you, bring it out of you. You understand what I mean? Okay, lifestyle stuff. Go on a walk, drink some water. Excuse me. Here we go. All together now. So good. Okay. Cook a healthy meal for yourself or something that just increases the energy in your body. We don't need to get into nutrition or anything like that. The perfectionism is keeping you trapped. You know this. When you get things figured out for yourself over time, it's not everything clicking into place that works for you. It's taking a tiny step forward and the physical and emotional feeling in your body of like, this was positive momentum. It's not perfect. I'm not on the level of these picture perfect lifestyle influencers. I'm just doing something that makes me feel good. So increase the energy in your body with food that will do that. And only you know what that is. You have to live a little bit intuitively here, okay? Now notice, none of what we've talked about so far is about removing any of the negative substances from your life. And that is because subtraction simply does not work. When you put all of your attention on throwing the vapes in the trash and deleting Instagram and TikTok from your phone, right? And getting through your weed supply and then living this perfect monk lifestyle where you will abstain from all the negativity for the rest of your life. All of your attention is on that negative substance. That's what you're looking at. That's what you're thinking about. And so by default, whether it's a day or a week or a month, you will fall back to it. If you do not have a meaningful replacement for those things in your life, you will default back to the negative substances. So don't blame yourself. Don't put any judgment or criticism or shame on yourself. Those are all things that push you right back through to the top of the cycle where you turn to the substance again. You are only going to focus on addition, adding in fun things. On the creative side of things, journaling, art, talking to people, starting interactions. and healthy lifestyle practices at the level that you can do them, sitting up from a laying down position in bed, or getting up out of bed, or starting a load of laundry, or going out on a 5-minute walk, or joining a climbing gym and starting to do that, or strength training, or going on a run. Like, you have to assess within yourself what you're capable of doing. But then you do that and you just start with that. That is the most meaningful thing you can start with when it comes to your individual choices. And I promise you that even though it's difficult, and there's inherent meaning in the difficulty, even though it's difficult, if you are able to stick with it and slowly increase the amount of time that you spend doing those things and the variety of activities you choose to do instead of turning to negative substances, you will crave it. You will learn to love it. That will happen. And it'll happen faster and easier than you think, as long as you're coming from a place of true enjoyment. If you are operating from a place of shame or guilt, I need to do this because I'm not good enough and I won't be good enough until I do these things, it won't happen. Shame won't work. Guilt won't work. So take a breath right now and realize the very good news here, which is that when this works, and it will, you will enjoy the process the whole time. And until you enjoy the process, it's not going to happen. So by default, you have to like doing it for this to work. Okay, I think you understand the idea here. This is extremely raw and unedited, and this whole experience will get better over time. But it was very important for me to sit down and do it like this, right? This is exactly it. This is exactly what you're gonna do, what you're capable of doing, instead of turning to negative substances to tranquilize yourself in an age of chronic consumption and distraction, where we have an entire culture built around those things, around instant gratification. Humans want more than that. You want more than that. That feeling of emptiness, you can transcend that, and it actually doesn't take a lot to do it. That's all I'm saying. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. You can consider this episode 1 or 2 of Inner World. That's what we're going to call this thing. And I'm excited that you're here. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you. We're in this together. And we got this. Boom. Have a phenomenal rest of your day. I love you. Mwah. Okay. All right. Goodbye. Yes. Thank you.